The scent of rain hung heavy in the air as Josephine Blackburn stepped off the stagecoach in Malad City, Idaho Territory, 1885, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frightened bird. Her pale fingers clutched the worn leather satchel to her abdomen, concealing what no unwed woman could afford to reveal in polite society: the slight, yet unmistakable swell of a child growing within her. The journey from Boston had drained her completely. 3 weeks of constant travel, hiding her condition beneath loose dresses and strategic shawls, enduring nauseating bumps along rutted trails while maintaining a facade of calm respectability. She had chosen Malad City precisely because it was remote, a growing but still modest settlement nestled in the Idaho Territory where no one would know her name or the shame she carried. "Madam, need help with your luggage?" The driver's voice startled her from her thoughts. "No, thank you. This is all I have." Her voice cracked slightly from disuse. She had spoken little on the journey, fearing that conversation might lead to questions. Josephine surveyed the main street of Malad City with a critical eye. It was larger than she had anticipated from the advertisement seeking teachers that had brought her west. A proper hotel stood at one end, several businesses lined the dusty street, and the distant sound of piano music drifted from what must be a saloon. The mountains surrounding the valley were magnificent, but she had little time to admire natural beauty. She needed shelter, employment, and anonymity in that order. As the stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her standing alone on the boardwalk, the first drops of rain began to fall. She had arrived in Idaho Territory with precisely $17.43 to her name. Not enough to survive long, especially with a child coming in approximately 4 months. The school term wouldn't begin for another week, and she had yet to present herself to the town council that had responded to her letter of application. The rain intensified suddenly, and Josephine hurried toward the hotel, head down against the downpour. Her foot caught on an uneven plank, sending her lurching forward. She would have fallen face first into the muddy street if not for the strong hands that caught her shoulders. "Whoa there. Careful, madam." The voice was deep, with the slight drawl she'd come to associate with Westerners during her journey. Josephine straightened, her hand instinctively moving to her abdomen before she caught herself and raised her eyes to meet those of her rescuer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, crinkled slightly at the corners as he looked at her with concern. "Thank you," she managed, taking a step back, clutching her satchel more tightly. "You're new in town." It wasn't a question. "Beau Tanner," he introduced himself, tipping his worn Stetson. "Ranch just north of town." "Josephine Blackburn," she replied automatically, then regretted giving her real name, but it was too late now. "I've come to take the teaching position." His expression brightened. "The school teacher. Well, that's fine news. The children have been without proper learning since Miss Winters left to marry last spring." The rain was coming down in sheets now, and Beau gestured toward the hotel. "Let's get you out of this downpour. The Malad City Hotel isn't fancy, but it's clean." Josephine hesitated. Being seen walking into a hotel with a man, even innocently, could spark gossip she couldn't afford. But the alternative was standing in the rain, drawing even more attention. "I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Tanner." But a crack of thunder interrupted her refusal, and Beau Tanner made the decision for her, taking her small satchel and offering his arm. "No proper introduction to Malad City should include a drenching," he said with a smile that transformed his weathered face. Inside the hotel lobby, Josephine was acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance as Beau spoke quietly with the proprietor, a pinch-faced woman named Mrs. Hollister. "Room for the new schoolteacher," Beau explained. Just arrived on the stage. Mrs. Hollister's narrow eyes swept over Josephine, lingering momentarily on her middle before moving to her unmarried left hand. Of course. We've been expecting you, Miss Blackburn. The school board mentioned you'd be arriving this week. I can come back later to discuss rates, Josephine said, painfully aware that her meager funds wouldn't stretch far. Already settled, Beau interjected. The town council arranged your lodging until the schoolhouse residence is ready. Part of the agreement to bring a qualified teacher to Malad. Relief washed over her, though she was careful not to show it. That's very kind. Folks here value education, Beau said simply. He handed her satchel back and tipped his hat again. I'll let you get settled. Town council meets tomorrow at noon if you'd like to introduce yourself properly. Might save you from Mrs. Peterson's interrogation later. She chairs the school board and has been beside herself wondering if you'd arrive in time for term. Josephine nodded. Thank you again, Mr. Tanner. Beau, he corrected. Then with a friendly nod to Mrs. Hollister, he stepped back into the rainy afternoon, leaving Josephine to follow the thin-lipped proprietress up creaking stairs to a small but tidy room that would be her home until she could move into the teacher's quarters. Alone at last, Josephine sank onto the narrow bed and released the breath she felt she'd been holding since Boston. She placed a trembling hand on her abdomen. We made it this far, she whispered to the child within. Now we just need to survive. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the previous day's storm having scrubbed the air clean. Josephine dressed carefully in her most modest dress, a navy blue cotton with a high collar that disguised her condition reasonably well if she didn't turn sideways. She'd need to let out some seams soon or find new clothing. Another worry for another day. After a simple breakfast in the hotel dining room, where she endured curious glances from other patrons, Josephine decided to explore Malad City before her meeting with the town council. The settlement was laid out in a neat grid, with the main street featuring a general store, a bank, 2 churches, a doctor's office, and various other businesses essential to a growing town. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Adjacent to it stood a modest cabin that must be the teacher's residence. Josephine approached slowly, imagining herself standing before a classroom of children, her own child perhaps asleep in a cradle in her living quarters. Could she manage it? Would the town allow an unmarried mother to teach their children, once her condition became impossible to hide? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the approaching rider until the horse nickered softly. Looking up, she found herself again facing Beau Tanner, this time mounted on a magnificent chestnut gelding. "Morning, Miss Blackburn," he called, swinging down from the saddle with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. "Checking out your new domain." "Good morning, Mr. Tanner." "Yes, I wanted to see the school before meeting with the council." He tied his horse to the hitching post and came to stand beside her, looking at the schoolhouse with evident pride. "Built it myself, along with some other men from town. The old one burned down 2 winters ago." "It's lovely," Josephine said honestly. The building was well constructed, with large windows to let in natural light. "Wait until you see inside." He pulled a key from his pocket. "Mrs. Peterson gave me this yesterday when I told her I'd likely run into you. Said you might want to look around before the meeting." Josephine hesitated. Being alone with a man, even to view her workplace, might raise eyebrows, but her curiosity won out. "Thank you. I would like to see it." The schoolroom was spacious and airy, with 3 rows of desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, bookshelves lined the back wall, and a globe sat on a stand near the window. "We have about 25 students when everyone attends." Beau explained, moving to open windows to air out the room. Ages 6 to 16, though the older boys often miss during planting and harvest. That's to be expected, Josephine said, running her fingers along the smooth surface of her desk. She had taught briefly in Boston before everything changed. The familiar setting calmed her. The teacher's quarters need some work, Beau continued, gesturing toward a door at the rear of the classroom. There's a connecting passage to the cabin. Mind your step. The cabin was indeed in need of attention, dusty, with a few broken floorboards and a window that didn't quite close properly. But it had a proper kitchen, a small sitting room, and a bedroom that would accommodate her needs. The furnishings were sparse but serviceable. I can have this fixed up before you move in, Beau offered, frowning at the state of the place. Get some of the men together, make it proper. That's very kind but unnecessary, Josephine protested, though the thought of those broken floorboards in her condition gave her pause. I'm quite capable, of course you are, he interrupted with a smile. But why should you have to be? Consider it Malad City's welcome gift. Before she could argue further, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at the doorframe for support. Beau was at her side instantly. Miss Blackburn, are you all right? The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, but it left Josephine shaken. Just a moment of dizziness, she lied. Perhaps from the altitude. I'm not accustomed to mountain living yet. Beau's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't challenge her explanation. Instead, he gently guided her to a chair. Sit for a moment. I have water in my canteen. As she sipped the cool water, Josephine was acutely aware of Beau watching her, his expression thoughtful. Did he suspect? Had her careful concealment failed already? Panic rose within her, but she forced it down, schooling her features into calm appreciation. Thank you, Mr. Tanner. I'm feeling much better now. Beau, he corrected again, then checked his pocket watch. Almost time for your meeting. Would you allow me to escort you? Mrs. Peterson can be formidable. Josephine nodded, grateful for both the water and the change of subject. As they walked toward town, Beau pointed out various landmarks and introduced her to people they passed. He seemed to know everyone, and everyone clearly respected him. Are you on the town council as well? She asked, curious about his position in the community. He chuckled. No, madam. I'm just a rancher, though I do sit on the school board since I have no children of my own to bias my decisions. No family. The question slipped out before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed his face. My wife and son died of fever 5 years ago. I'm so sorry, Josephine said softly, genuinely moved by the quiet pain in his voice. Life goes on, he said simply, then gestured to a brick building ahead. Town Hall, ready to meet your employers. The town council consisted of 5 members. The mayor, a portly banker named Harrison, the local doctor, an elderly man called Whitley, the owner of the general store, Adams, the minister from the larger of the town's 2 churches, Reverend Michaels, and Mrs. Peterson, a steel-spined widow who indeed proved to be formidable. Your credentials are impressive, Miss Blackburn, Mrs. Peterson said after introductions were complete. Though I must say, we expected someone older. I may be young, but I assure you I'm well qualified, Josephine responded, handing over her teaching certificate and letters of recommendation. She had taught for 2 years in Boston before her current predicament, and had excelled in her studies before that. Boston, is it, Doctor? Whitley peered at her over his spectacles. What brings a city girl to our little corner of Idaho? The question she had been dreading. Josephine had prepared her answer carefully. My parents passed last winter, she said, the partial truth easier to tell than a complete fabrication. I found myself seeking a fresh start, somewhere my skills could be useful. When I saw your advertisement, it seemed providential. Sympathy softened the faces around her, except for Mrs. Peterson, whose sharp eyes remained calculating. No other family. None close enough to matter, Josephine answered, which was true enough. Her sister in Philadelphia had made it clear that Josephine's disgrace was not welcome in her respectable household. The questions continued about her teaching philosophy, her familiarity with various subjects, her willingness to incorporate Bible study into the curriculum, she agreed, of course, and her thoughts on discipline, firm but fair. Throughout it all, Josephine maintained her composure, though she was painfully aware of Beau Tanner standing quietly at the back of the room watching. "Well, Miss Blackburn," Mayor Harrison finally said, "I believe you'll do nicely. School begins Monday next. The teachers' quarters should be ready by Saturday. Mr. Tanner has volunteered to oversee the repairs." "That's very generous," Josephine said, glancing at Beau, who nodded slightly. "Until then, your room at the hotel is arranged," the mayor continued. "Any questions for us?" There were many questions. Josephine wanted to ask about the town's tolerance for unwed mothers, about midwives in the area, about her chances of keeping her position once her condition became obvious, but none she could voice. "No questions, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity and will endeavor to justify your faith in me." As the meeting concluded, Mrs. Peterson approached her directly while the others chatted. "Young women often find frontier life challenging, Miss Blackburn," she said in a low voice, "particularly those on their own. Should you need guidance, my door is always open." There was something in the older woman's tone, not judgment exactly, but awareness, that made Josephine wonder if her secret was already suspected. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. I appreciate that." Outside the town hall, Beau waited, holding the reins of his horse. "How did it go?" "Well enough, I think," Josephine replied. "Thank you for your support regarding the teachers' quarters." "My pleasure. I've already rounded up some men to start work this afternoon." He hesitated, then added, "I'm headed to the general store for supplies. Would you care to join me? You might want to see what's available for your personal needs." The thoughtfulness of the offer touched her. "Yes, thank you." As they walked toward the store, Josephine again noticed how people greeted Beau with genuine respect and affection. Children ran up to him, and he had a kind word or small sweet for each one. This was a man well loved by his community. "You're good with children," she observed. A fleeting sadness crossed his face. "I miss having them around. My boy would be 11 now." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly. "Don't be. Speaking of him keeps his memory alive." He looked at her curiously. "Do you have experience with children beyond teaching?" "Some," she answered carefully. "I helped raise my younger cousins after my aunt fell ill." At the general store, Beau introduced her to Adams, the proprietor, and his wife, a friendly woman who immediately began showing Josephine the various goods available. The store was well stocked for a frontier town, though prices were considerably higher than in Boston. "We receive shipments monthly," Mrs. Adams explained. "If there's something particular you need, we can usually order it." Josephine selected a few necessities: soap, candles, some basic foodstuffs, acutely aware that every penny spent diminished her small reserve. When she reached the counter to pay, she was surprised to find that Beau had already settled her bill. "Mr. Tanner, I cannot accept. Consider it a welcome gift," he said firmly. "And part of your wages. The school board authorized an advance for your settling in expenses." Relief washed over her, though pride made her protest weakly. "That's very kind, but no arguments, Miss Blackburn," he said with a smile that transformed his face. "Malad City takes care of its own, and you're one of us now. One of them." The words brought an unexpected lump to her throat. How long had it been since she belonged anywhere? Since her parents' deaths, since the betrayal that had left her in her current condition, she had felt adrift, unwanted. "Thank you," she managed, blinking back sudden tears. Concern crossed Beau's face. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," she assured him quickly. It's been a long journey." His expression softened with understanding. "Of course. Let me walk you back to the hotel. You should rest before dinner." As they walked, Josephine realized she felt more at ease with this stranger than she had with anyone in months. There was a steadiness to Beau Tanner that invited trust, a dangerous feeling for a woman with secrets. "Will you join the town for services on Sunday?" he asked as they approached the hotel. The question startled her. Church attendance would be expected of the schoolteacher, of course, but the thought of standing before God in her condition. "Yes, certainly," she said, pushing aside her misgivings. "Which church do most families attend?" "Reverend Michael's has the larger congregation, though Preacher Wilson's gathering is growing. Both are good men." He paused, then added, "I could escort you if you'd like, introduce you around properly." The offer was tempting. Having Beau's clear approval would smooth her acceptance in the community, but also dangerous. The more time spent in his company, the greater the risk he might notice her condition. "That's very kind," she hedged. "Perhaps we could discuss it later in the week." "I'm still settling in." If he was disappointed, he didn't show it. "Of course. I'll be around town supervising the work on your quarters. Feel free to stop by the school anytime to check progress." With a tip of his hat, he left her at the hotel entrance. Josephine watched him mount his horse and ride away, struck by the odd mixture of relief and loneliness his departure evoked. That evening, alone in her room, Josephine unpacked her few possessions and took stock of her situation. In many ways, her first day in Malad City had gone better than she dared hope. She had secured her position, found the community welcoming, and even made what might be considered a friend in Beau Tanner. Yet, as she prepared for bed, the reality of her predicament reasserted itself. The baby kicked, a firm reminder of the ticking clock she faced. By Christmas, her child would be born. By Christmas, everyone would know her shame. Would the town that welcomed the Boston schoolteacher be so kind to the unwed mother? Would they allow such a woman to teach their children? And what of Beau Tanner, with his kind eyes and gentle manner? The thought of seeing respect transformed to disgust in his gaze was surprisingly painful. "We'll manage somehow," she whispered to her unborn child as she drifted toward sleep. "We always do." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Josephine reviewed the school records left by her predecessor, organized lesson plans, and visited the schoolhouse daily to monitor the renovations. True to his word, Beau had assembled a crew of men who worked efficiently to repair the teachers' quarters. New floorboards were laid, the leaky window fixed, the chimney cleaned, and the entire cabin scrubbed until it gleamed. Beau himself was often present, working alongside the others, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms bronzed by the sun. Josephine tried not to notice such things, but found her eyes drawn to him repeatedly. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the respect he commanded without raising his voice, the way his rare smile transformed his serious face. "What do you think?" he asked on Friday afternoon, gesturing to the freshly painted walls of the main room. Mrs. Peterson selected the color, said it was appropriately dignified for a schoolteacher's residence. The soft cream color was indeed pleasant, brightening the small space considerably. "It's lovely," Josephine said honestly. "I can't believe the transformation. I'm deeply grateful, Mr. Tanner." "Beau," he corrected automatically as he had each time she addressed him formally. "And you're welcome, though it wasn't just me. The whole town pitched in. That was true. Throughout the week, various townspeople had contributed to the effort, women bringing meals for the workers or donating household items for the new teacher, children carrying messages or smaller supplies, men offering specialized skills or simply muscle power. Still, it was your initiative, Josephine insisted. I won't forget your kindness. Something flickered in his blue eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. It's nothing more than you deserve, Miss Blackburn. Josephine, she said impulsively. If I'm to call you Beau, you should use my given name. His smile came then, warming his weathered features. Josephine, he repeated, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither acknowledged, until a call from outside broke the spell. Tanner, need your opinion on this porch step. Beau cleared his throat. Duty calls. Will you be attending services Sunday? My offer to escort you stands. Josephine had been avoiding this decision, but could delay no longer. Yes, thank you. I would appreciate the introduction to the community. I'll call for you at 9 then. With a nod, he stepped outside to address the porch issue, leaving Josephine to wonder if she had just made a terrible mistake. Saturday brought the final touches to the teacher's quarters, and Josephine's move from the hotel. By afternoon, she was settled in her new home, marveling at the generosity of the townspeople. Beyond the repairs, she had received gifts: a handmade quilt from Mrs. Peterson, nights get cold early in the mountains, preserves and bread from various women, a small bookshelf built by Adams from the general store, and most touching, a vase of wildflowers picked by some of her future students. To welcome teacher, read the crude note attached, signed by the Malad City School. Alone in her new home, Josephine arranged her few possessions, trying to make the space her own. The small bedroom would serve for now, but she would need to find a way to accommodate a cradle in the coming months. Perhaps the alcove off the kitchen. A knock at the door interrupted her planning. Smoothing her dress carefully to ensure it disguised her condition, she opened the door to find Beau standing there, hat in hand. Hope I'm not disturbing you, he said. Just wanted to make sure everything meets with your approval. It's perfect, she assured him. Far more than I expected. He nodded, clearly pleased. Good, I brought you something. From behind his back, he produced a small wooden object, a carved horse, exquisitely detailed. A welcome gift. I make these in the evening sometimes. Josephine accepted the carving, running her fingers over the smooth lines. It's beautiful. Did you make this yourself? He nodded, a hint of color touching his tan cheeks. Just a hobby. My son used to collect them. The mention of his lost child created a moment of shared understanding between them, both acquainted with grief, both alone in the world. Thank you, Josephine said softly. I'll treasure it. He cleared his throat. Well, I should let you get settled. 9 tomorrow, I'll be ready, she promised. After he left, Josephine placed the carved horse on her small mantel, where it became the centerpiece of her new home. The gesture touched her deeply, not just the gift itself, but that he had shared something connected to his son, a precious memory. That night, lying in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her cabin, the creak of new wood settling, the whisper of wind through pine trees, the distant howl of what might be a coyote, Josephine allowed herself to imagine, just briefly, what it might be like to belong in a place like this. To be accepted, not just as the schoolteacher, but as herself. To have someone like Beau Tanner look at her with something warmer than mere friendship. Then reality reasserted itself. Once her condition became known, any such dreams would evaporate like morning mist. Her best hope was to establish herself as an excellent teacher before her secret emerged, perhaps earning enough goodwill to weather the scandal. And after the baby came, well, she would face that when it happened. Sunday dawned clear and cool, a hint of autumn in the air despite the August date. Josephine dressed in her best dress, a dark green wool that had belonged to her mother, altered to accommodate her changing figure while still appearing modest. She arranged her hair simply but neatly and pinned her mother's cameo at her throat. Promptly at 9, Beau arrived, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best: clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a coat that, while obviously well worn, had been carefully brushed and pressed. He had tamed his usually wind-tousled hair, and his face was freshly shaved, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw. "You look lovely," he said, his eyes warm as they took in her appearance. "As do you," she returned, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks at the compliment. "Very handsome." The walk to church gave Beau opportunity to tell her more about the town and its inhabitants. "Reverend Michaels has been here almost since the beginning," he explained. "Built the church himself, along with his sons. Good man, though a bit stern in his sermons. And the congregation. What should I expect? Mostly families. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a few professionals like Doc Whitley. Good people, though they can be curious about newcomers." He glanced at her. "They'll have questions, but don't let it worry you, they mean well." The church was nearly full when they arrived, and Josephine felt the weight of curious stares as Beau escorted her to a pew about halfway to the front. Whispers followed them, and she fought the urge to touch her abdomen protectively. "The new schoolteacher," she heard more than once, along with Tanner, brought her, which seemed to cause particular interest. Beau seemed oblivious to the attention, greeting people warmly as they passed. He introduced Josephine to so many people that she knew she would never remember all the names, but she smiled and nodded, trying to appear confident and composed. The service itself was familiar, similar enough to what she had known in Boston that she could participate without difficulty. Reverend Michaels had a powerful speaking voice, and, as Beau had warned, a somewhat stern approach to Scripture. His sermon focused on the prodigal son, emphasizing not just forgiveness but the necessity of true repentance. Josephine felt the weight of those words personally. Repentance. Was that what she needed? She had trusted unwisely, loved foolishly, but were those sins requiring divine forgiveness? And what of her child, innocent of any wrongdoing? The questions troubled her throughout the service. Beside her, Beau sang hymns in a surprisingly pleasant baritone, his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers in the crowded pew. The small contact was strangely comforting in this sea of strangers, a reminder that she was not completely alone. After the service came the real ordeal, the social gathering outside the church, where Josephine was formally introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Malad City. Women evaluated her clothing and manner. Men assessed her suitability as their children's teacher, and children themselves peeked shyly from behind parents' legs, curious about the new authority figure in their lives. Through it all, Beau remained at her side, his steady presence lending her confidence. When questions became too personal, "What brings you all the way from Boston?" or "No young man waiting for you back east," he skillfully redirected the conversation to safer topics. "Miss Blackburn is already planning improvements to our school curriculum," he would say. Or, "Wait until you see what she's done with the teachers' quarters, quite an eye for detail." By the time they finally extricated themselves from the crowd, Josephine was exhausted from maintaining her careful facade. The morning had grown warm, adding to her discomfort, and she longed for the privacy of her cabin. "You handled that well," Beau said as they walked back toward the school. "First Sundays are always the hardest." "They mean well, I'm sure," Josephine replied diplomatically. He chuckled. Some do. Others are just nosy. Mrs. Wilkins asked me 3 times if you were spoken for. I think she has designs on matching you with her nephew. Josephine's heart sank. Matchmaking was the last thing she needed. I hope you discouraged her. Told her you were dedicated to your teaching career, he said with a sidelong glance. Seemed safest. The answer pleased her more than it should have. Thank you, that's accurate. When they reached her cabin, Josephine expected Beau to take his leave, but he hesitated on the porch. I was wondering if you might like to join me for dinner, he said, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. Nothing formal, just a meal between friends. The invitation surprised her. Today, if you're not too tired, I thought you might appreciate not having to cook after such a busy morning. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her, and against her better judgment, Josephine found herself accepting. I would like that, thank you. Relief brightened his features. Wonderful. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew. Say 5 o'clock. My place isn't far, just north of town. I can come fetch you. That's not necessary, just give me directions. He hesitated. It's a fair walk and the path isn't always clear. I enjoy walking, Josephine insisted, unwilling to be seen riding out of town with a bachelor, even one as respected as Beau. Her reputation was precarious enough, and fresh air would be welcome after that crowded church. Reluctantly, Beau gave her directions to his ranch, then took his leave with a promise to expect her at 5. Once alone, Josephine sank into a chair, her hand moving to her abdomen where the baby had begun a series of energetic movements. What am I doing? She whispered. Accepting dinner invitations from handsome ranchers was not part of her careful plan. Getting close to anyone was dangerous. The closer people came, the more likely they were to discover her secret. Yet there was something about Beau Tanner that made her want to trust him. His kindness seemed genuine without ulterior motive, and after months of solitude and shame, the prospect of a friendly meal was powerfully appealing. Just dinner, she told herself firmly. Nothing more. At precisely 4:45, Josephine set out for Beau's ranch, following his directions along a well-trodden path that wound through a meadow north of town. The afternoon was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and pine. In the distance, mountains rose majestically against the blue sky, their peaks still showing patches of snow despite the August heat. The walk was longer than she anticipated, and Josephine was breathing heavily by the time Beau's ranch came into view. It was a modest but well-maintained property, a sturdy log cabin with a wide porch, a large barn, several corrals containing horses, and what appeared to be cattle grazing in distant pastures. As she approached, Beau emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He spotted her immediately and raised a hand in greeting, a smile transforming his usually serious face. "You made it," he called, striding toward her. "I was beginning to worry." "It's a beautiful walk," Josephine said, hoping her flushed cheeks would be attributed to the exercise rather than the strange fluttering in her chest at the sight of his smile. "Your land is lovely. Thank you. It's not much compared to some of the bigger spreads, but it's mine." There was quiet pride in his voice. "Come inside. Dinner's almost ready." The interior of Beau's cabin was surprisingly comfortable, larger than her teacher's quarters, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and what she presumed were bedrooms through doors at the back. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, above which hung a rifle and what appeared to be family heirlooms. The furniture was simple but well crafted, much of it apparently made by Beau himself, judging by the similar style to the wooden horse he'd given her. Most striking was the cleanliness and order of the place. Unlike many bachelor establishments Josephine had glimpsed in her travels west, Beau's home was immaculate, with a place for everything and everything in its place. "Your home is beautiful," she said honestly. He looked pleased at the compliment. "My wife insisted on certain standards, and I've maintained them. Helps me feel she's still here, in a way." The mention of his late wife created a moment of shared understanding between them. Both had known loss. Both lived with ghosts of what might have been. "Tell me about her," Josephine said softly, sensing that perhaps Beau didn't often have the opportunity to speak of his lost family. He seemed surprised by the request, but after a moment's hesitation, he moved to a shelf and retrieved a small framed photograph. "Eleanor," he said, passing it to Josephine, "and our son, James." The photograph showed a pretty woman with a serious expression holding a toddler with Beau's eyes. "She's beautiful," Josephine said, "and James looks just like you. He had his mother's spirit, though, fearless." A shadow passed over Beau's face. "The fever took them both within days of each other. I was away delivering cattle to Fort Hall by the time I returned." He trailed off, the pain still evident years later. "I'm so sorry, Beau," Josephine said, genuine empathy in her voice. "That's an unbearable loss." He nodded, taking the photograph back and returning it carefully to its place. "Life continues even when we think it cannot. You learn to carry the grief rather than be crushed by it." He turned back to her with a small smile. "But enough of sad tales. You didn't come here to listen to my troubles. Let me check on our dinner." As Beau tended to the stew simmering over the fire, Josephine found herself studying him with new understanding. His kindness, his readiness to help others, his connection with the children in town, all were facets of a man who had known profound loss yet chosen to remain open to the world rather than bitter. What would such a man think of her situation? Would he judge her harshly for her indiscretion? Or might he understand that loneliness and misplaced trust could lead to devastating consequences? "Something wrong?" Beau asked, catching her thoughtful gaze. Josephine shook her head quickly. "Not at all, just grateful for your hospitality." The meal itself was simple but delicious, a hearty beef stew with vegetables from Beau's garden, fresh bread he'd obtained from the baker in town, an apple pie that he confessed had been made by Mrs. Peterson, who takes pity on my bachelor cooking skills now and then. Conversation flowed easily between them as they ate. Beau told stories of his early days in Malad City, arriving as a young man with little more than determination and a willingness to work hard. Josephine spoke of her teaching experiences in Boston, carefully editing her recent past but sharing genuine anecdotes about her students and her love for education. "What made you decide to become a teacher?" Beau asked as they lingered over coffee after the meal. Josephine considered the question. "My father was a professor at a small college. I grew up surrounded by books and learning. It seemed natural to follow that path, though as a woman, my opportunities were more limited." "Your parents must be proud," Beau observed. The comment sent a pang through her heart. "They would have been, I think. They passed last winter influenza." "I'm sorry," Beau said softly. "It seems we've both known our share of loss." Josephine nodded, unable to speak for a moment as emotions threatened to overwhelm her. If her parents had lived, how different her situation might be. Her father would have confronted the man who had abandoned her, perhaps forced a marriage. Her mother would have helped her through the pregnancy, stood by her side. Instead, she faced her disgrace alone. "Josephine." Beau's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you all right?" She blinked back tears, embarrassed by her lapse in composure. "Yes, I'm sorry, just memories." "No need to apologize. Grief has its own timetable." He reached across the table, hesitating before gently covering her hand with his own. "I understand that better than most." The touch was comforting, his calloused palm warm against her skin. For a brief moment, Josephine allowed herself to draw strength from the connection before reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Thank you for understanding," she said quietly. "And for dinner. It was wonderful." Sensing her need to change the subject, Beau began clearing the table. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. Perhaps it could become a regular occasion. Sunday dinners, I mean. The path between town and my ranch can be lonely." The invitation was tempting, dangerously so. "That's very kind, but I should focus on preparing for the school term. My first weeks will be crucial in establishing myself with the students and parents." If he was disappointed, Beau didn't show it. "Of course, teaching must be your priority." As dusk approached, Beau insisted on accompanying Josephine back to town. "I won't have you walking those meadows alone at twilight," he said firmly. "Too many hazards from uneven ground to the occasional wild creature." Recognizing the logic of his argument, Josephine acquiesced, and they set off together, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. The beauty of it caught her breath, so different from the crowded streets of Boston. "It's magnificent," she murmured, pausing to take in the vista. "It is," Beau agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking not at the landscape but at her, an expression in his eyes that made her heart skip. Flustered, Josephine resumed walking, and they continued in companionable silence until they reached the edge of town, where houses began to dot the path. "I can find my way from here," Josephine said, aware that being seen walking with Beau at dusk might spark unwanted gossip. He seemed about to protest, then nodded in understanding. "Will you be all right preparing for tomorrow? First days can be daunting." "I'll manage," she assured him, touched by his concern. "Thank you again for dinner. It was a pleasant respite before the school term begins." "My pleasure." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. My ranch isn't far." With a tip of his hat, he left her there at the edge of town, and Josephine watched him stride away, his tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. An inexplicable sense of loss swept through her as he disappeared from view, which she firmly attributed to nerves about the coming day. The first day of school dawned clear and cool. Josephine arrived early, arranging her desk and writing a welcome message on the blackboard. She had spent much of the previous evening reviewing student records and preparing lessons, grateful for the distraction from thoughts of Beau Tanner and his kindness. As the school bell rang, children began filing in, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Josephine counted 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, a challenging mix that would require careful planning to keep all engaged and learning. "Good morning," she greeted them with what she hoped was a confident smile. "I am Miss Blackburn, your new teacher. I look forward to getting to know each of you as we learn together this term." The morning proceeded better than she had dared hope. After initial introductions, Josephine assessed her students' abilities through simple exercises, discovering that while some were quite advanced for their ages, others struggled with basic concepts. The previous teacher had apparently favored the older children, leaving the younger ones somewhat neglected in their fundamentals. By noon, when she dismissed the children for lunch, Josephine felt cautiously optimistic about her prospects. The students seemed receptive to her methods, and even the rowdier boys had responded to her firm but fair approach to discipline. As the children scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Josephine remained at her desk, reviewing her notes for the afternoon lessons. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the visitor until a shadow fell across her papers. "How goes the battle?" Beau asked, his expression warm as she looked up in surprise. "Mr. Tanner, what brings you to school today?" "School board business," he said with a smile. "And I thought you might appreciate this." He placed a small basket on her desk, containing a sandwich, an apple, and a jar of cold tea. Teaching is hungry work. The thoughtful gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. I did forget to pack anything for myself in the excitement of the first day." "How are they treating you? The children, I mean." "Better than I expected," Josephine admitted, "though I've identified several who will need extra attention." They chatted easily as Josephine ate, Beau sharing insights about certain students based on his knowledge of their families. His observations were astute and kind, never gossipy or judgmental, and Josephine found herself grateful for the insider's perspective. As the lunch hour drew to a close and children began filtering back into the schoolroom, Beau took his leave. "I'll let you get back to your charges," he said. "Mrs. Peterson will likely stop by later this week for a more official evaluation, but between us," he lowered his voice, "I think you're doing splendidly." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you, Beau." "Josephine," a scandalized young voice interrupted. "You called Mr. Tanner by his given name." Josephine turned to find several of her older female students staring at them with wide eyes, clearly fascinated by this glimpse of their teacher's personal interactions. "Mr. Tanner and I are friends," Josephine explained calmly, though she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "When we are not in a school setting, we use our given names as adults often do." This explanation seemed to disappoint the girls, who had clearly hoped for something more romantic to gossip about. As they moved to their seats, whispering among themselves, Beau caught Josephine's eye with a look of amused understanding. "I'll leave you to it, Miss Blackburn," he said formally, tipping his hat with exaggerated propriety that made her bite back a smile. After he left, Josephine found herself distracted throughout the afternoon lessons, her thoughts returning to their conversation and the easy companionship they seemed to share. It was dangerous, this growing connection. Once her condition became obvious, any friendship, let alone anything deeper, would surely be impossible. Yet despite her rational concerns, Josephine couldn't deny the comfort Beau's presence brought, or the way her heart lightened when he smiled at her. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with genuine warmth rather than judgment or pity. The first weeks of the school term passed in a blur of activity. Josephine threw herself into teaching with a passion born partly of genuine love for education, and partly of the need to establish herself firmly in the community before her secret became impossible to hide. She introduced new reading materials, organized the students into ability groups rather than strict age divisions, and began a small library with books donated by townspeople. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. Parents commented approvingly on their children's renewed interest in learning. Mrs. Peterson, after a formal observation that had initially terrified Josephine, declared herself cautiously satisfied with the new teacher's methods. High praise indeed, according to Beau. Beau himself remained a steady presence in Josephine's life, though she carefully maintained appropriate boundaries. He often appeared at the end of the school day with some small errand or question that somehow led to walking her home or bringing her supplies she hadn't realized she needed. On Sundays, they sat together in church, though Josephine politely declined further invitations to dinner at his ranch, citing preparation for school as her excuse. By late September, as autumn painted the surrounding mountains in vibrant hues of red and gold, Josephine could no longer ignore the reality of her situation. Her dresses, even with alterations, strained to conceal her growing belly. The baby moved vigorously now, especially in the evenings when she sat quietly grading papers or preparing lessons. And she had begun to notice speculative glances from some of the townswomen, particularly Mrs. Peterson, whose sharp eyes missed little. On a crisp Saturday morning, as Josephine was hanging laundry behind her cabin, Mrs. Peterson appeared at her gate, her expression unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," Josephine called, trying to sound normal despite the sudden knot of fear in her stomach. "What brings you by today?" "I think you know, Miss Blackburn," the older woman replied, opening the gate and approaching. "May we speak privately, inside the cabin?" Josephine offered tea with hands that trembled slightly. Mrs. Peterson accepted, her piercing gaze never leaving Josephine's face. "How far along are you?" she asked without preamble once they were seated. The blunt question, though expected, still shocked Josephine into momentary silence. For an instant, she considered denial, but the futility of it was obvious. Mrs. Peterson was not a woman easily deceived. 5 months, she finally answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "A little more." Mrs. Peterson nodded as if confirming a suspicion. "I thought as much. Does the father know?" The question brought a bitter taste to Josephine's mouth. "He made it clear he wants no part of it, or of me." "I see." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "And you came west to escape the scandal." It wasn't a question, but Josephine nodded anyway. "I had nowhere else to go after my parents died. My sister, she has her own reputation to consider." Mrs. Peterson sipped her tea thoughtfully. "You've done well with the children. They respect you and they're learning. That's not something I say lightly." "Thank you," Josephine said, uncertain where this conversation was leading. "However, Mrs. Peterson continued, setting down her cup with a decisive click, "Malad City has certain standards. An unwed mother cannot teach our children, no matter how capable she might be." Though expected, the words still cut deeply. "I understand," Josephine said, forcing dignity into her voice despite the panic rising within her. "When would you like my resignation?" "I didn't say anything about resignation," Mrs. Peterson replied sharply. "I said an unwed mother cannot teach. The solution seems obvious to me." Confusion replaced panic. "I don't understand. You need to be wed, Miss Blackburn, and quickly before your condition becomes obvious to less observant eyes than mine." Josephine stared at her, dumbfounded. "But who would?" "Don't be obtuse, girl. Beau Tanner has been looking at you like you hung the moon since the day you arrived. And he's a good man who needs a wife and family as much as you need a husband and father for your child." Heat rushed to Josephine's face. "Mrs. Peterson, I couldn't possibly. He doesn't even know about my condition, and to trap a man into marriage under such circumstances would be unconscionable." "Who said anything about trapping?" Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "I'm simply suggesting you be honest with him. Give him the choice." Beau Tanner is not a man easily swayed by public opinion, and he's been alone far too long. The suggestion was both terrifying and tempting. Josephine had grown to care deeply for Beau over the past weeks. His kindness, his quiet strength, his gentle manner with children. In another life, one where she wasn't carrying another man's child, she might have allowed herself to hope for his affection, but this reality. Could she bear to see disgust or rejection in his eyes when he learned the truth? "I can't," she whispered. "It would be asking too much." Mrs. Peterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if reaching a decision. "Very well. Then I suggest you begin making arrangements. The school term ends in December, which coincides approximately with your due date, if my calculations are correct. The town council will need to know soon to find a replacement." Josephine nodded, resignation settling over her like a heavy cloak. "I'll write my formal letter this weekend. See that you do." Mrs. Peterson rose to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I think you're underestimating Beau Tanner, and perhaps yourself as well." After Mrs. Peterson left, Josephine sat motionless at her table, staring at nothing. The careful life she had begun to build in Malad City was crumbling around her, just as she had feared it would. Soon she would be without employment, without a home, and with a newborn to support. The meager savings she had managed to accumulate from her teaching salary would not last long. Where could she go? What options remained for an unwed mother with limited funds and a tarnished reputation? As evening approached, Josephine finally roused herself to begin the dreaded letter of resignation. She had just dipped her pen in ink when a knock at the door startled her. Hastily covering the blank paper, she rose to answer, expecting perhaps Mrs. Peterson returning with more unwelcome advice. Instead, Beau Tanner stood on her porch, hat in hand, his expression unusually serious. "Beau," she greeted him, surprise evident in her voice. "Is something wrong? May I come in?" he asked, his tone giving nothing away. Heart pounding, Josephine stepped aside to admit him, wondering if somehow he had already learned her secret. Had Mrs. Peterson gone directly to him despite her promise of discretion? "I saw Mrs. Peterson leaving your place earlier," Beau said once they were seated in her small sitting area. She seemed purposeful. Josephine swallowed hard. She had some school board business to discuss. "I see." Beau studied her face, his blue eyes searching. "And did this business upset you? You look troubled." The concern in his voice nearly undid her. How easy it would be to confide in him, to lay her burdens at his feet and hope for understanding. But the risk was too great, the potential loss of even his friendship more than she could bear. "It's nothing serious," she lied. "Just some adjustments to the curriculum," she suggested. Beau nodded slowly, clearly unconvinced. "Josephine," he said, her name a gentle question in his deep voice. "We've known each other for nearly 2 months now. I'd like to think we've become friends." "We have," she agreed softly. "Then, as your friend, I'm asking, is there something troubling you? Something I might help with?" The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten with unshed tears. "That's very kind, but because," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "I've noticed things. How you've begun wearing looser dresses. How you avoid certain foods at community suppers. How you sometimes place your hand on your abdomen when you think no one is watching." Shock rendered Josephine speechless. He knew. All this time, while she'd been carefully guarding her secret, Beau had observed and understood. "I don't mean to presume," he added quickly, misinterpreting her silence. "And I certainly don't mean to pry into matters that aren't my concern. But if you're in some kind of trouble, Josephine, I want you to know that you're not alone. Not alone." The words echoed in her mind, so simple yet so powerful. How long had it been since she'd truly felt that way? Since her parents' deaths, she had carried her burdens in isolation, first the grief of losing them, then the betrayal by the man she'd trusted, and finally the shameful secret of her condition. "Beau," she began, then faltered, unsure how to continue. He reached across the small space between them to take her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." The tenderness in his voice broke something inside her. Tears that had been held back for months suddenly spilled down her cheeks, and once they began, she couldn't stop them. Months of fear, shame, and loneliness poured out in heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Without hesitation, Beau moved to sit beside her, drawing her gently into his arms. He held her as she wept, one hand stroking her hair soothingly, murmuring quiet words of comfort that she couldn't quite make out through her tears. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, Josephine became acutely aware of their position, her head against his chest, his arms around her, her tears soaking into his shirt. Embarrassed, she tried to pull away, but Beau kept one arm loosely around her shoulders. "Better?" he asked quietly. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry for that. Display. Don't apologize for having feelings," he said firmly. "We all need to let them out sometimes." Taking a deep breath, Josephine steeled herself for what must come next. If he already suspected, there was no point in further deception. Whatever his reaction might be, she owed him the truth. "I'm with child," she said simply, her voice steadier than she expected. "The baby is due around Christmas." Beau nodded, no surprise in his expression. "I thought as much." The father, a colleague at the school where I taught in Boston, he was not pleased when I told him, made it clear he wanted no part of the situation. The memory still had the power to hurt, though less sharply now than before. He was engaged to another woman, I later learned. A woman of means and social standing. Beau's expression darkened. "A coward, then?" "Yes," Josephine agreed softly, "though I was equally foolish to believe his promises." "Being deceived doesn't make you foolish," Beau countered. "It makes him dishonorable." The defense warmed her heart, unexpected as it was. "Mrs. Peterson knows," she continued. "She came today to tell me that an unwed mother cannot teach in Malad City. I'm to submit my resignation, effective at the end of term in December." Anger flashed in Beau's eyes. "That's ridiculous. You're an excellent teacher. The children adore you, and they're learning more than they have in years." "Nevertheless, the town has standards," Josephine said, echoing Mrs. Peterson's words. "I understand their position. No parent wants their impressionable daughter taught by a woman of questionable morals." "There's nothing questionable about your morals," Beau said firmly. "You made a mistake, yes, but you're facing the consequences with courage and dignity. That shows more moral character than most people I know." His defense of her was touching, but changed nothing. "Regardless, I'll need to leave Malad City once the term ends. Find somewhere else to start over, again." "No." The word was soft but definitive. Josephine looked at him in confusion. "No, no," Beau repeated, taking both her hands in his. "There's another solution." Realization dawned slowly. "Beau, if you're suggesting what I think you are, marry me, Josephine." Though Mrs. Peterson had hinted at this very possibility, hearing the words from Beau's lips stunned her. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," he replied, his blue eyes steady on hers. "But why would you do such a thing? The child isn't yours, I'm not. I'm damaged goods, Beau." He flinched at her words. "Don't ever say that again," he said, an edge to his voice she'd never heard before. "You are not damaged goods. You're a woman who was betrayed by someone who should have protected you. That doesn't diminish your worth." "Even so," Josephine persisted, "I can't allow you to sacrifice yourself out of pity or misplaced chivalry." "Pity?" Beau's expression shifted to something like exasperation. "Josephine, surely you must know by now that my feelings for you go far beyond pity or friendship." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you," Beau said simply. "Your intelligence, your kindness, your courage in facing adversity. I've watched you build a life here through sheer determination, winning over even the most skeptical members of our community. How could I not love you?" Tears threatened again, but these were different tears of astonishment and fragile hope. "But the baby will be loved," Beau finished firmly. "By both of us. I lost my chance at fatherhood once. I never thought I'd have another opportunity." "You'd claim another man's child as your own?" Josephine asked, still unable to believe what she was hearing. "I would claim you both," Beau corrected. "Not out of obligation or pity, but because I want a life with you, Josephine. A family. This isn't how either of us planned it, perhaps, but life rarely follows our plans." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't an impulse or a noble sacrifice. Beau had clearly thought about this, perhaps for some time. "When did you know?" she asked softly. "About the baby, I mean." "I suspected almost from the beginning," he admitted. "My sister had 3 children. I recognized the signs. But it wasn't my place to say anything until you were ready to confide in me." "And your feelings, when did those develop?" A smile touched his lips. "The moment you stepped off that stagecoach, looking so determined despite being clearly exhausted. But I didn't recognize it as love until that Sunday dinner at my ranch, when you asked about Alina and James. The way you listened, truly listened, without empty platitudes or awkward pity. I knew then that I wanted you in my life permanently." Josephine's heart felt too full for her chest, emotions tangling inside her: hope, fear, gratitude, and something deeper that she'd been afraid to name. "I've never met anyone like you, Beau Tanner," she whispered. "You make me feel safe in a world that has been anything but safe for a very long time." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope evident in his voice. Was it? Could she accept this unexpected gift? There were practical considerations: how the town would react, what story they would tell about the baby's parentage, whether Beau truly understood what he was taking on. But beneath those concerns lay a simpler truth. She loved him too. Perhaps had, since that first day, when he'd caught her as she stumbled in the rain and looked at her not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person of value. "If we do this," she said slowly, "there will be talk. People will count the months between wedding and birth." "Let them talk," Beau replied with a shrug. "We'll say the baby came early, or that we had a private ceremony back east before you traveled here, or simply that it's no one's business but ours. Those who matter won't care, and those who care don't matter." "Your reputation is strong enough to weather a little gossip," he interrupted gently. "And worth sacrificing if it means a life with you." Josephine studied his face, looking for any hint of doubt or reservation, but found only sincerity and what could only be described as love. "Then yes," she said finally, her voice gaining strength with the decision. "Yes, I will marry you, Beau Tanner." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise, hope, and a future brighter than anything she had dared imagine. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Beau rested his forehead against hers. "We'll make this official immediately. Tomorrow, after church, Reverend Michaels can announce our intention to wed, and we'll have the ceremony next Sunday. No need for elaborate preparations unless you want them." Josephine shook her head. "A simple ceremony would be perfect." "But are you certain you don't want more time? This is rather sudden." "I've waited 5 years to feel this way again," Beau said softly. "I don't need more time to know my own heart." As the reality of their decision settled over her, Josephine felt the weight she'd carried for months begin to lift. There were still challenges ahead: explaining their hasty marriage to the town, preparing for the baby, building a life together. But for the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she didn't face those challenges alone. "Not alone," she murmured, echoing his earlier words. Beau's arms tightened around her. "Never again," he promised. Word of their engagement spread through Malad City like wildfire after Reverend Michael's announcement the next day. Reactions were mixed: surprise from most, knowing looks from a few, particularly Mrs. Peterson, who couldn't quite suppress a satisfied smile, and a few raised eyebrows at the hasty timeline. But Beau's standing in the community was such that most accepted the news with genuine congratulations. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparations. Beau arranged for a wagon to transport Josephine's belongings to his ranch after the ceremony, while she continued teaching during the day and spent evenings altering one of her better dresses to serve as a wedding gown. Women from town, led by Mrs. Peterson, organized a small reception to follow the ceremony, and several brought gifts, linens, preserves, handcrafted items for the home they would share. Most touching was the reaction of Josephine's students, who were unanimously delighted by the news. The younger children made cards with exuberant if uneven lettering, while the older ones presented her with a hand-bound book containing pressed wildflowers from the meadows around Mallet City. "So you'll always remember your first home here," explained 14-year-old Sarah, the project's ringleader. "I'm not leaving," Josephine assured them, touched by the gesture. "I'll still be your teacher. I'll just be Mrs. Tanner instead of Miss Blackburn." "And you'll live at Mr. Tanner's ranch," added 10-year-old William with the practicality of a child raised in rural Idaho. "That's a fair piece to travel each day." It was a consideration Josephine and Beau had already discussed. During the winter months, when heavy snow might make daily travel between the ranch and town difficult, she would stay at the teacher's quarters during the week and return to the ranch on weekends. After the baby came, they would reassess, perhaps arranging for someone to assist with childcare during school hours. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains, a perfect late October day in Idaho territory. In the small room behind the church where she prepared, Josephine found herself uncharacteristically nervous. Not about marrying Beau, that decision felt more right with each passing day, but about the public nature of the ceremony, the eyes that would be upon them, the judgment that might lurk behind some of the smiles. A knock at the door interrupted her anxious thoughts. "Who is it?" she called. "Mrs. Peterson," came the reply. "May I come in?" Josephine opened the door to admit the older woman, who carried a small box. "I brought something for you," Mrs. Peterson said, unusually gentle. "A bride should have something borrowed." From the box she withdrew a delicate lace veil. "I wore this when I married Mr. Peterson 43 years ago. It brought me luck, a good marriage, though shorter than I would have wished. Perhaps it will do the same for you." Touched beyond words, Josephine accepted the veil with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," Mrs. Peterson replied briskly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Just be happy, child. Beau Tanner is a good man, and you, well, you're stronger than you know." With expert hands, she attached the veil to Josephine's carefully arranged hair, then stepped back to assess the effect. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Every inch a bride." Josephine turned to the small mirror on the wall and barely recognized herself. The woman who looked back seemed transformed not just by the veil or the simple but elegant dress she'd altered, but by something more fundamental. Hope, perhaps, or the certainty of being loved. "It's time," Mrs. Peterson said, offering her arm. "Shall we?" With no father to give her away, Josephine had worried about this part of the ceremony. But when she'd expressed her concern to Beau, he'd simply said, "You're not property to be given. You're choosing to join your life with mine as I am with yours. We'll walk to the altar together, or however you prefer." In the end, she had asked Mrs. Peterson to accompany her down the aisle, a request that had visibly moved the normally stoic woman. Now, as the first notes of the wedding march sounded from the church's small organ, Josephine took a deep breath and placed her hand on Mrs. Peterson's arm. "I'm ready." The church was full, not just with the usual Sunday congregation, but with virtually everyone in Mallet City. As Josephine entered, all eyes turned to her, but she saw only Beau waiting for her at the altar. He wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, and the expression on his face as he watched her approach was one she would remember for the rest of her life, a mixture of awe, tenderness, and absolute certainty. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Reverend Michaels spoke of commitment, partnership, and the sanctity of marriage. Beau's voice was steady as he repeated his vows, his eyes never leaving hers. When it came her turn, Josephine was surprised to find her own voice equally firm, despite the emotion swelling within her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Michaels finally declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Beau's lips met hers in their first kiss as a married couple, Josephine felt the last of her doubts dissolve. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The reception following the ceremony was a lively affair, held in the town hall decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. The entire community turned out to celebrate, bringing dishes for a communal feast and offering congratulations to the new couple. "Mrs. Tanner," Beau murmured during a rare moment alone, testing the sound of her new name. "It suits you." "Does it?" she asked, still adjusting to the idea herself. "I've been Josephine Blackburn for so long." "You're still Josephine," he assured her, his hand finding hers beneath the table. "Just Josephine Tanner now, my wife." The pride in his voice as he said those words warmed her heart. "Husband," she replied, marveling at how right it felt to call him that. As evening approached, they thanked their guests and prepared to leave for the ranch, their home now, not just Beau's. The women had arranged a proper send-off, with rice throwing and cheerful advice called out as they climbed into Beau's wagon. "Enjoy your wedding night," someone shouted, triggering laughter and more explicit suggestions that made Josephine blush to her roots. Beside her on the wagon seat, Beau squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "There are no expectations tonight or any night until you're ready." The consideration behind his words brought tears to her eyes. They had discussed this aspect of marriage only briefly during their short engagement, with Beau making it clear that while he desired her, he understood her condition and recent experiences might make physical intimacy difficult initially. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning against his solid presence as the wagon pulled away from town, heading toward their future together. The first weeks of marriage brought adjustments for both of them. For Josephine, there was the shift from independent schoolteacher to wife, learning to share space with another person after months of solitude. For Beau, there was the pleasure and challenge of having a woman in his home again after 5 years alone. Yet the transition was smoother than either had anticipated. They fell into natural rhythms, Beau rising early to tend to ranch chores, Josephine preparing for her school day, shared meals when their schedules aligned, quiet evenings by the fire discussing their days. On weekends, they worked together on projects around the ranch or rode into town for supplies and social calls. As November progressed and Josephine's pregnancy became more pronounced, Beau's attentiveness increased accordingly. He insisted on driving her to and from school each day, worried about the increasingly cold weather and her condition. He modified a chair in their sitting room to better support her back, and fashioned a footstool that was just the right height to ease the swelling in her ankles after a day of teaching. Most touching was the way he included the unborn child in their daily life, speaking to Josephine's rounded abdomen each morning and evening, sharing stories about the ranch and his plans for their future. "I'm making a cradle," he told her one evening in late November when the first significant snowfall had kept them housebound. "From the cherry wood that's been seasoning in the barn. Thought our little one deserved something special. Our little one." The casual claim of parentage never failed to move her. "Beau," she said softly, "you don't have to pretend the baby is yours, not when we're alone." He looked up from the book he'd been reading, genuine confusion on his face. I'm not pretending anything. This child will be mine in every way that matters. I'll be there for the first steps, the first words, the skinned knees and nightmares and triumphs. That's what makes a father, not the accident of blood. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. He meant every word. I don't deserve you, Josephine whispered, tears threatening again, a common occurrence these days which she blamed on her condition. Nonsense, Beau replied, setting aside his book to join her on the settee. If anything, I don't deserve the second chance you've given me. A family of my own again, after I thought that door forever closed. As he gathered her into his arms, Josephine marveled at how natural it felt to be held by him, to share this closeness that had developed gradually since their wedding. Though they had not yet consummated their marriage in the physical sense, an intimacy had grown between them that was in many ways deeper, built on trust, respect, and genuine affection that deepened daily into love. The baby kicked vigorously as if sensing her thoughts, and Beau chuckled as he felt the movement against his own abdomen. Strong little thing, he observed. Takes after its mother, or its father, Josephine replied without thinking. Beau's smile lit his entire face. I hope so, he said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. I hope so. December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, making the daily journey to and from town increasingly difficult. After a particularly harrowing return trip during a snowstorm, Beau put his foot down. You're staying at the teacher's quarters until the Christmas break, he declared as they finally reached the safety of their home, both chilled to the bone despite heavy coats and blankets. I won't risk you and the baby on these roads again until the weather improves. Josephine, who had been secretly dreading the daily travel herself as her due date approached, agreed without argument. I'll miss you, she said simply. I'll come to town at week's end, Beau promised, and you'll be home for the holidays in 2 weeks. By then, we'll have a new addition to the family. The reminder of her imminent delivery sent a flutter of anxiety through Josephine. Though Dr. Whitley had been monitoring her condition and pronounced both mother and child healthy, childbirth was always risky, especially for a first-time mother. And doing so in a frontier town, far from modern medical facilities. Stop worrying, Beau said, reading her expression with the ease of a man who had come to know her well. Dr. Whitley has delivered half the children in this county, and Mrs. Peterson has assisted with the rest. You and our baby will be fine. His confidence bolstered her own. Of course we will, she agreed, pushing aside her fears. We'll have the best Christmas present imaginable. The following day, Beau helped Josephine pack what she would need for her stay in town and drove her to the teacher's quarters. The small cabin felt strange after weeks at the ranch, both familiar and somehow alien, as if it belonged to a different version of herself. It's only for 2 weeks, Beau reminded her as he carried in her bags. Then school lets out for Christmas and you'll be home again. Home. The ranch had indeed become that more quickly than she would have thought possible. I know, she said, forcing a smile. I'll be fine. But as Beau prepared to leave, an unexpected wave of emotion swept over her. Wait, she called as he reached the door. I need to tell you something. He turned back, concern in his eyes. What is it? Are you feeling unwell? No, nothing like that. Josephine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I just wanted to say, I love you, Beau Tanner, not out of gratitude or necessity, but truly and completely. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. The words had been building inside her for weeks, perhaps months, but she had hesitated to speak them, fearing they might sound obligatory rather than genuine. But now, facing 2 weeks apart, she couldn't let him leave without knowing. For a moment, Beau stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed the room in 2 long strides and gathered her in his arms, his kiss carrying all the passion that had been carefully contained throughout their courtship and early marriage. "I have waited so long to hear you say that," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, Josephine, more than I can possibly express." They stood together in the center of the small cabin, foreheads touching, hearts beating in tandem, neither willing to be the first to pull away. Finally, Beau sighed and stepped back reluctantly. "If I don't leave now, I won't leave at all," he admitted. "And you need your rest before school tomorrow." "I know," Josephine agreed, though every part of her protested the separation. "Friday isn't so far away." With one last kiss, Beau departed, leaving Josephine with the echoes of their declarations and the unfamiliar emptiness of a bed without him beside her. The week crept by at an agonizing pace. Josephine threw herself into teaching, using the distraction of her students' excitement about Christmas to keep her own loneliness at bay. Each night, she wrote long letters to Beau, sharing the events of her day and her thoughts on their future, which she gave to the mail carrier who passed through town daily. On Thursday evening, as she sat grading papers by lamplight, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. She paused, waiting to see if it would recur, and when it did not, returned to her work. An hour later, the pain returned, stronger this time and accompanied by a rush of fluid that left no doubt as to what was happening. Her water had broken. The baby was coming, a full week before her calculated due date. Panic gripped her momentarily. Beau wasn't due in town until tomorrow, and the roads might be impassable with fresh snow. She would have to manage alone, at least initially. Taking a deep breath, Josephine moved methodically through the steps Dr. Whitley had advised for early labor. She changed her clothing, prepared the bed with clean linens, and placed a kettle to heat on the stove. Then, timing the contractions, which were still relatively far apart, she penned a quick note and sent the boarding house boy who sometimes did errands for her to fetch both Dr. Whitley and Mrs. Peterson. By the time they arrived, the contractions were coming more frequently, though still manageable. Dr. Whitley examined her with professional detachment, while Mrs. Peterson began organizing the cabin for the birth ahead. "Everything appears normal," the doctor assured her. "But this being your first, we could be in for a long night. First babies often take their time." "Should someone notify my husband?" Josephine asked, wincing as another contraction built. Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Whitley exchanged glances. "The roads are treacherous after today's snow," the doctor said carefully, "and your husband is several miles out of town." "But he would want to know," Josephine insisted. "He would want to be here." "Of course he would," Mrs. Peterson agreed. "I'll send word." Whether the messenger can reach the ranch is in God's hands. As night deepened, Josephine's labor intensified. The pain became a world unto itself, waves of it washing over her with increasing frequency and force. Mrs. Peterson stayed by her side, offering encouragement and practical support, while Dr. Whitley monitored the progression with calm professionalism. "You're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Peterson assured her during a brief respite between contractions. "A natural mother, if I ever saw one." Josephine managed a weak smile, too exhausted for words. Hours had passed and still no word from Beau. Had the messenger been unable to reach the ranch? Or had Beau received the message but found the roads too dangerous to attempt as midnight approached? Dr. Whitley announced that the time for pushing was near. "The baby is in position," he explained. "When I tell you, I need you to bear down with all your strength." Josephine nodded, gathering her remaining energy for the final stage of this marathon. As the next contraction built, she closed her eyes and thought of Beau, his strength, his unwavering support, his love that had transformed her life. Drawing on that image, she pushed with everything she had. "Good," Dr. Whitley encouraged. "I can see the head." One more push with the next contraction. The door to the cabin burst open, bringing a gust of frigid air and swirling snow. Beau stood in the doorway, covered in fresh snow, his face pale with concern and exertion. "Josephine!" he exclaimed, rushing to her bedside heedless of the doctor's startled protest. "Beau!" she gasped, joy and relief warring with the overwhelming pain of the imminent contraction. "You came!" "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," he said, taking her hand in his. "I'm here now. We'll do this together." With Beau supporting her back and whispering encouragement, Josephine found strength she didn't know she possessed. One final, tremendous push, and the baby slipped into the world with a lusty cry that filled the small cabin. "A boy, Doctor," Whitley announced, quickly attending to the newborn. "A fine, healthy son." "A son," Beau repeated in wonder, his eyes filled with tears as he looked from the squalling infant to Josephine's exhausted but radiant face. "Our son." Mrs. Peterson efficiently cleaned and swaddled the baby, then placed him in Josephine's trembling arms. She looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair, perfect in every way. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Beau perched carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm around Josephine's shoulders as he gazed at the newborn. "He's beautiful," he said softly, "just like his mother." The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused, but seemingly seeking the sound of their voices. "I think he has your chin," Josephine said, reaching up to trace the line of Beau's jaw. "And your determination," Beau replied with a chuckle as the infant's tiny fist waved emphatically. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had never firmly decided. Now, looking at the child they would raise together, Josephine knew what felt right. "James," she said quietly, "after your son, if that's all right with you." Emotion overwhelmed Beau's features. For a moment he couldn't speak, could only press his lips to her temple in wordless gratitude. "James," he finally managed, his voice rough with feeling. "James Thomas Tanner. Perfect." Dr. Whitley discreetly completed his post-delivery care while Mrs. Peterson prepared tea and a light meal for the new parents. The storm outside had intensified, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of weather prevailed, the warm glow of new life and love rekindled. "The roads are too dangerous for travel tonight," Dr. Whitley declared as he prepared to leave. "But mother and child are doing splendidly. I'll check in tomorrow, weather permitting." After the doctor and Mrs. Peterson departed, promising to return in the morning, Josephine and Beau were finally alone with their son. The baby had nursed successfully and now slept peacefully between them on the bed, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "I was so afraid you wouldn't make it in time," Josephine admitted, her fingers entwined with Beau's. "Nothing could have stopped me," he assured her. "When the messenger arrived, I saddled my fastest horse immediately. The main road was blocked by drifts, but I knew an old hunting trail that cuts through the hills. You could have been hurt traveling in such conditions," she chided gently. "I had to be here," he said simply, "for both of you." In the soft glow of the lamp, they gazed at their sleeping son, marveling at the miracle they had been given, not just the child himself, but the family they had created from the broken pieces of their separate lives. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Beau murmured. "After Alina and James, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd live out my days alone with my memories. And I never thought I would find someone who could look past my shame to see me," Josephine replied softly. "Someone who would choose to love not just me, but my child." "Our child," Beau corrected, his fingers gently stroking the baby's downy head. "From this moment forward, he is ours together, just as we are each other's." As if in agreement, little James stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand closing reflexively around his father's finger. The gesture, simple yet profound, brought fresh tears to Josephine's eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of absolute certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. Outside, the winter storm raged on, blanketing Malad City in pristine white. But inside the teachers' quarters, a different kind of miracle had occurred, a family forged not by convention or obligation, but by choice, by love, and by the courage to begin again. "Not alone," Beau whispered, echoing the words he had spoken months ago when Josephine first revealed her secret. "Never alone again." "Together," Josephine agreed, her heart full to bursting, "always together." And as the night deepened around them, three hearts beat in unison, the beginning of a new chapter in a story that had started with shame and fear, but would continue with love, acceptance, and the boundless possibilities of a future they would build together. In the years that followed, the Tanners became one of Malad City's most respected families. Josephine continued teaching until their family expanded again, twin girls born 2 years after James, followed by another boy 3 years later. Though she eventually retired from formal teaching to focus on their growing family, she never lost her passion for education, tutoring students from the ranch and later helping to establish Malad City's first proper library. Beau's ranch prospered under their joint management, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the county. He remained active in community affairs, serving on the school board and later as a county commissioner, while never missing a single milestone in his children's lives. As for James, he grew into a fine young man who resembled Beau so strongly in manner and character that few remembered or cared about the circumstances of his birth. He was a Tanner through and through, hard-working, honest, and kind, with his mother's intelligence and his father's quiet strength. On their 25th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children and grandchildren gather at the ranch for a celebration, Beau pulled Josephine aside for a private moment on the porch where they had shared so many sunsets over the years. "You ever regret it?" he asked, his hair now silver but his blue eyes as bright as the day they met. "Taking a chance on a lonely rancher all those years ago," Josephine, still beautiful at 53, smiled up at the man who had transformed her life with 4 simple words: "You're not alone." "Never," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Not for a single moment." And as they rejoined their family, the family they had built together from unexpected beginnings, both silently gave thanks for the courage that had led them to each other, and for the love that had made them whole.